Caleb's been my top guy the whole time. That hasn't changed for me. I think he's a pretty incredible talent. And talking to the Bears people, I said, give me one thing about him that you've learned like through this process of, getting to know him from, when the season ended to now. And they said, this guy's been able to tune out the chaos, like unbelievable ability to tune that out. It's not often you say this about any player because somebody's got an enemy somewhere. Yeah. It's like this guy's teammates love him. You think the kids at Oklahoma have any reason to lie there? Like he left them. He's not even on their team. And they're like, they love him. They rave about him.
All right, so it's here, and that's good news for Daniel Jeremiah, who I think works as hard as anybody in the country. This point in the season, in the offseason rather, getting ready for the NFL draft, who's better to talk to than DJ, former scout, move the sticks, NFL media guru, and draft guru. Daniel, how you doing, dude?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to see you guys, man.
It's good to see you. When do you go to Detroit, and are you excited? Is any part of you excited at this point in the year? Is it just like, hey, man, it's like a wedding. You can't wait for it to be over?
That looks like a Detroit hotel room there.
He's in Detroit. Okay. That's a Detroit hotel room.
We are here, brother. Which, by the way, as somebody who, spent 150-plus nights on the road as a scout for 8 years, probably think I would know to, like, check the weather before I traveled. But, nah. I went out to dinner last night. I was just like, holy crap, it's still cold in parts of the country. Like I live in San Diego. What's going on?
Yeah, it is Michigan. But I think it's going to be I think it's going to be fun. I don't know what you felt like being on the ground there, but when I think about like rabid football cities, and right now they happen to be in a good mood and they're excited about their draft because the draft has lately been yielding some pretty good prospects. Detroit's going to be pretty fun, I would think.
No, it's a great football area. And the other thing that like stood out to me was just landing at the airport. I think that they have every Michigan sweatshirt, University of Michigan hat, like national championship T-shirt. I think like as you land in the airport, they just give you one. Like it was like the whole airport was all wearing Michigan gear. Like there's no way Jim Harbaugh will ever have to pay for anything ever again when he visits out here.
What? This is a weird place to start, but let's start there. What do you think the Chargers are doing? I mean, this is your bread and butter. What's the word in and around the building when it comes to Jim and the culture shift? And then also, what do you think they do?
Look, the physicality stuff's real. Like he wants to kind of change that identity of that team and how they play and what they do. With bringing Herbert, the strength coach, in there, I think, they've got a real good turnout in terms of all their offseason stuff. The guys get in there and working, but I still feel like, trading back and getting a bunch of picks. They had kind of like a sneaky number of holes when you look at their roster. I feel like forever we've talked about them as, like one of the most talented rosters in the league. But when you look at it, you're like, well, dude, they need a D tackle, they need a corner, they need an off the ball linebacker, the center. Obviously, the receiver hole that everybody's talked about, like there's a lot of stuff that they want to do there. So I figure like as many, Harbaugh type guys they can get in there that kind of fit. And I'm not talking about Michigan guys, but just like physical style of players that it'd be kind of a volume draft. So that's why I've been kind of beating the drum that, I think they'd like to get out of there at 5, slide back and take a tackle where there's maybe a little more value, as well as getting some extra picks to address some of those other needs. But I mean, it wouldn't shock me, Chris, if they traded back and took like Byron Murphy, the DT from Texas. It wouldn't shock me, if they took like Terrion Arnold from Alabama, the corner. I mean, I think it's about collecting as many like their types of players, like physical, tough, high energy guys. Like I think that's more so that philosophy than one specific player.
I think it's interesting because you look at the quarterback and generally you're like, hey, we've got a special guy. Yeah. We need to surround him with skill. Skill. That's the way people think about it. But to your point, it seems like they're trying to stick the landing on a culture shift simultaneously.
Yeah, I just feel like, I mean, if you're Jim Harbaugh, I look at it this way. Like I've been doing it one way everywhere I've ever been, and that one way has worked every single time. So
Yeah.
while the whole world is telling me I've got a superstar quarterback and I need to just throw a bunch of weapons and we're going to throw for 5,000 yards, he's like, well, I don't have to do that. Like my formula works, and I'm going to take a lot of pressure off of Justin. Then he doesn't have to be that guy, game in, game out. And when we need him to do it, he can do it. But I don't see him changing. Like, well, I don't know what would be in his history that would tell him he should.
Is that pick the number 5 overall pick by LA? Is that where the deal is most likely to happen, in those 10 or 15 minutes rather than in the weeks and months leading up to the draft?
I don't even think it's like specific to them. Like I know, New England has told some teams like, hey, the latest that I'd heard there was like, hey, we're not doing anything now. Like we'll see, when we get on the clock, that then something, we'll see what the offers are. I think there's something to the fact of, putting that pressure on the deadline and saying, okay, we've got this 15 minutes. Like you better come strong with your first offer, and then we'll work aggressively from there. But I think there's something to that. There seems to be expectations we won't see anything until these teams get on the clock. But I know, Joe Ortiz at his press conference the other day, he was talking about how like we're going to have to be blown away. And then it got all these headlines, and everybody was talking about like, wow, you're going to really have to give them a great offer. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, what are you going to say? Like, hey, 60 cents on the dollar over here. Like, just give me anything. I'll take it. What is he supposed to say?
No, I know. I mean, like half of the smoke screens are crazy. And one of them that keeps coming up seems to be like the quarterback character assassination thing.
Yeah.
Last year was CJ didn't go to Peyton's camp. And I can't think of a young quarterback that I've ever seen that's had more between the ears than this guy. I mean, can't figure out one that's had more. I like him, Burrow, guys like that. I put him in the same class of human being walking in the league. Caleb, I talked to Ryan Clark. He came to our golf tournament this week, and he was like, man, we had Caleb on the pivot this week. And I don't know if you got a chance to watch.
I saw some clips. I saw some clips, yeah.
And Ryan was like, I really liked him. Like I was like really blown away by him. I watched at least 5 people through the course of the event make a comment alluding to the fact that they don't buy the Caleb Williams thing. And Ryan had to explain to them, kind of the conversation that they had and why he thinks differently. I feel like Caleb had the bullseye on his back from the beginning. Is it gamesmanship from other teams? Is it just the media sowing dissent? Or is it just the way it is when a guy cries after a game in public or when he paints his nails? Like, are we going to get this every year when it comes to pick one quarterback out of the top 3 to 4 quarterbacks?
I think there's a lot of different things in play there. I think some of it is, look, there's like a USC thing that some people have where they're just like, oh, it's a USC. It's like they're rich, spoiled. They're soft. They're not tough. Like that whole thing has followed USC forever. Even when USC was winning national championships, I was in scouting and you hear it. People say that. So you've got some of that mixed in. You've got just the fact of he was, he's like first to market, right? Like of anybody in this entire draft, like we knew about him early and identified him as this great player. So he gets put up, and then it's like, well, where else is for him to go? Like we're just going to shoot arrows at him the whole time.
Yeah, we got to talk about something.
Yeah, and then you also have like I've posed this question because I know like I get asked about this all the time, like the fingernails and like all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, dude, like these generations are just going to constantly change. I'm like, you what would happen if you went to like Rick Mahorn and asked him what he thought of the way that today's NBA players enter into games with what they're wearing and stuff like that.
No question.
You know what I mean? Like it all changes, and it's just get used to it. I remember being in the draft room, like when I first started drafting when I got in the league in 2003, we had an older scout who was probably in his early 70s. And like he was talking about guys having tattoos, and I'm like,
right.
Like what is going on? Like
Yeah.
everybody's gonna have tattoos here. Like it's just I think that's part of that older generation that just has a tougher time with that. But in talking, first of all, Caleb's been my top guy the whole time. That hasn't changed for me. I think he's a pretty incredible talent. And talking to the Bears people, I said, give me one thing about him that you've learned like through this process of, getting to know him from, when the season ended to now. And they said, this guy's been able to tune out the chaos, like unbelievable ability to tune that out. And he said, like, he's been in it this whole year. Like everybody's coming after him, all this attention. And he said, like, he has kind of remained unflappable. And he said we talked to all of his teammates, not only from USC that we could talk to, we went and talked to everybody at Oklahoma. And he's like, it's not often you say this about any player because somebody's got an enemy somewhere. Yeah. It's like this guy's teammates love him. You think the kids at Oklahoma have any reason to lie there? Like he left them. He's not even on their team. And they're like, they love him. They rave about him.
Yeah, I can't find anything that I really dislike about him personally. My trepidation is the same as it is every year, picking a quarterback up high. You just don't know. Yeah. And then the fact that I think on the football field, my thing has been, hey, on being on schedule, which is something when people critique him for being off schedule, what are they critiquing, Daniel?
Yeah, so this is a good conversation to have because you can't live like that in the NFL. You've got to be able to get the ball out of your hands. I use the phrase, you can't get bored with completions. Hey, if they're going to give me the shallow, I've just got to take it. I can't just be constantly big play hunting. The thing that I try to share those when you watch him, first of all, in 22, you saw a lot more of that, and he did that. Their offensive line was at least adequate in 22. This year was really bad. So you had a couple different things happening. You don't have Addison, who's a first round receiver that you had the year before. So your weapons aren't quite as good, but more than anything else, it was the offensive line. And against that offense, a lot of teams like to rush 3 and drop 8. So when you're doing that, now think about this. I watched his pressure reel. There's a lot of pressures in a 3-man rush, and I'm like, dude, what do you like? I don't know what you're supposed to do here. Like, you've got to try and get away from a free rusher. They're dropping 8 guys into coverage, and then that led to him some of the circus stuff, and he got himself in trouble. The other side of it was maybe subconsciously, I don't know that he was thinking this way, but every time when you're watching tape, every new series is another 7 points on the other side of the board. And it's like, dude, we have to score touchdowns on every series to have a chance, to win this game. So he was trying to get it. He was trying to get it 20 and 40 yards at a time instead of just taking, what's there. I think that's fixable. I do, because I've seen him do it in 22. I've seen him be a little bit more under control. And how many times do we see it where we see a guy who plays with, unbelievable talent in college, and we're like, man, this is going to be an adjustment. You're going to a bad team. The offensive line is going to be worse. Your weapons are going to be worse. Your defense is going to be worse. And I know we're talking college and the NFL, but he's going to be more protected with the Bears offensive line than he was at SC. He's going to be throwing, competition-wise, what he has and who he's playing against is going to be pretty solid for him in his favor with Keenan and DJ Moore. And his defense is not going to be giving up a zillion points where he feels that pressure that I got to go out and score on every single drive.
I think it's probably a mix of the two things. Like if we were playing Madden, once you get good at Madden, you try to take the top off the defense every play because you can, and you don't take the check down. And I think for some guys it's like a curse to be that talented. And then when you take on top of it the fact of the matter that you're down, you're spotting a team a touchdown every time you sit on the sideline, like that compounds. I think from a mentality standpoint, I can't even think of my next question because I can't get Mahorn out of my head watching Steph Jeff watching like Russell Westbrook wear a sack of potatoes with armholes into the stadium. Like, all right, but here's my next question. JJ McCarthy seems to be on the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like, okay, his game's going to have to elevate. He's going to have to make more plays. He's not going to enter a situation where you're going to grind the clock and run the ball and you're going to have all these stars around you and be this physical. Do you remember instances in the draft where there was a quarterback that we might have shorted when it came to his ceiling because of the style of play? Like the opposite of the Caleb Williams thing where it's like, we're holding that offense that JJ played in against him. Have there been guys like that in the past who were better pros than they were in college because they were asked to facilitate in college? Yeah,
I mean, a little different, but I mean, obviously I think, and we're talking about a guy, a first rounder versus Mr. Irrelevant, but I think you can look at Brock Purdy and say, okay, the core is there. Like the way I've tried to describe it, like from analogy standpoint, is like, I think that JJ has a lot of the same ingredients as these top guys do. It's just that those guys have more of it. Those guys have produced a wedding cake and he's produced a cupcake. Like there's just not as much to see there. He hasn't done it as much. He's one that you had to like watch a crap ton of tape because you'll go through like 4 games and like, I don't have a feel for what this guy is. Like that, it was in case of emergency break glass, offense. And there was very few times where they felt they need to do that. I know in talking to people that had watched tape with them that they said they'll be watching tape through a game and they'll get to like the 20 and JJ will go, you can fast forward it. And they'll go like, what do you mean fast forward? Like, we want to see how you operate in the red zone. He's like, it's just Michigan football from here. Like,
I handed it off.
Yeah, that's it. So he's like, and they said that like the coaches were pretty honest with them, which was, look, we're going to practice red zone. We're going to practice throwing in the red zone every single day in practice because we're going to eventually need it when we play Ohio State, and we're going to need it when we get in the playoffs. Every other team on our schedule, we can turn around, hand the ball off, and win. And so why take any unnecessary risk? And it's like, hey, not a knock on you, but literally we don't need you for those.
Right.
So
it's like George Kittle at Iowa.
Yeah, you had no production.
You're like, wait, hold on. How do you project that in the next level?
Hey, mock drafts are mocked, but how many front offices are reading these suckers?
Seems like they are.
Gosh.
And also,
seems like they let it seep in.
Why would anyone tell you the truth?
That's a good question. I've never once asked, and the weird thing about me in my life right now is I'm 46, and like kind of the guys that I entered into the league with now have all got GM jobs. Like it's kind of like watching these guys all rise up. So it's all your buddies. But I've never asked one of them, who are you going to pick? Ever.
Yeah.
Never. Now I'll try and work behind them a little bit and talk to guys that I know and they talk to in the league. That a lot of times that you're getting secondhand information. Of just they like this person, they don't like that person. And I know from conversations with these guys, like it's more so like, well, I know he's not taking this person because he crushed him. But that means I still think it could be one of 5 guys. I don't know which one of the 5, but I know I can at least eliminate, one of them. So they're constantly trying to figure out where you think guys are going to go, just so they have an idea of what the board looks like and to be prepared for scenarios of, okay, hey, this guy, and I talked to 4 teams that have issues with this particular player's shoulder. I know you guys passed him on the physical, but these other 4 teams, like they didn't feel comfortable taking him in the first round. So you better be prepared. I know you're thinking he's not going to be there, but you better be prepared. He could get, if he doesn't get to you, he's going to get close enough to you that, you could move up and get him. So there's a lot of those types of conversations. And then what I'll do, and I try to do this like a couple days before the draft. So I'll probably do it tonight, actually. I'll call these guys and I'll say, hey, I'm going to give you 4 names of players that I think are in the mix for you. Don't tell me, obviously don't care. You're not going to tell me who you're going to pick, but tell me if you picked each of these players, how they'd fit with what you guys do, and what you liked about them. So then when I'm on the air, guy gets picked, I can go, okay, one of the reasons they took this guy is because they view him as a compliment to what they have here, and they feel like in their division, blah, blah, blah. And then people will be like, you knew they were going to pick him. And I'm like, I did that for like 4 or 5 different players. So that was just who they picked.
That's funny. I mean, to tell you, I'm a couple years behind you, but I'm seeing Ian Yates Cunningham rise in the ranks, and, Gerard Mayo. You're crazy, a guy from my draft class, be the head coach of the Patriots. What am I doing with my life? But I have not asked either of them directly what they're doing. Yeah. Anything like you just don't do it.
That's a douche move. Like it's just
it would feel terrible coming out of your mouth. Yeah. You mentioned we were talking about quarterbacks. Washington bringing in 4 guys.
Yeah.
I think that's an awesome move. I like it. It might kind of read a little bit hardo.
Like, is there an eye in the sky watching how they interact with each other?
I don't know. I'm wondering, have you heard, are they all in the same room, like kind of talking through things together? They're just watching what they're acting like in the lobby? Because I do think there's something you can glean from that, like how people react to that uncomfortable situation. It's just another, thing to put in front of a group of prospects.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not unusual. I think that was the thing that was weird to me was like that so many people lost their minds on this. Like it's never happened before. Like, yeah. It happens every year. You're bringing in guys on different days. Sometimes you sync up positions. Sometimes, you're just coordinating schedules. And it's like, this is the only time we could get these guys in here. So sometimes it's on purpose.
Year. Yeah. So Vernon Golston, me, a couple guys in, and we're all looking at each other and they're looking at us. And I think there's a social component of that.
100%. I remember, by the way, one year I had to pick up, it was one of my first years in the league, so I had to do the airport pickups. And I remember we had Vilma come in. And I don't remember if we didn't have a first round pick or we picked late. And like the whole time, he was just, I was kind of taking him around everywhere. He's like, what are you guys doing? Like, you got Ray Lewis, you've got Bart Scott. Like, you guys don't
Mm-hmm.
pick till like, what am I even doing here? I'm like, I don't know, bro. We're just having a good
Exactly.
time, man. We get a good meal out of this thing. But I do think, Chris, to me, like bringing those guys in at the same time, part of it, and I think this was said out there, but part of it is the owner. Like your owner, I think these people think that these owners just own football teams full time. Like, this is not the way that it is. Like, they're not in town all the time. They've got all their other businesses and interests that they're running. It's an efficient way for the owner to get FaceTime with all these guys without having to babysit his office for a month. And then the other side of it is, I do think there's value in just seeing how guys, how they get along with each other. And to be an offensive coordinator and to say, okay, a lot of times what happens is you'll have different, like almost stations set up. So guys are going to go meet with the offensive coordinator. They'll have a time with the head coach, the GM, the director of scouting, and then, position coach. And they'll put them all in those. They're not going to be in the same rooms together. They'll put them in different spots, and you just kind of go around the circus. Well, when you're the offensive coordinator, you've got a chance 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes with one guy, then the next guy, then the next guy. It's literally apples to apples of seeing how they digest the information that you're giving them.
Last question on quarterbacks individually. Bo Nix, he's been to every team, evidently. He's had some contact with every single team in the draft. Who knows where he ends up? I like the guy. I don't know quarterbacks like you do in college, but I wonder what's the delta between him and the guys that could be picked in the top 5? Like, we see it, we accept it, like mock drafts burning into our brain for over the course of a few months. But like nobody asks why. So like why not Bo Nix?
Yeah, I think he gets a little bit punished for the offense. And look, my whole thing is like, he, in the offense that he was in, he literally set the NCAA record for completion percentage. But people look at the, all the analytic stuff with the average depth of target, and he's just, getting the ball out quick, easy completions. And then when it's not that, he's laying the ball up over the top. So you don't see him working kind of in the middle of the field as much as maybe some of the other guys. So that's where some of it, I honestly think and I know this for a fact because I can tell if I talk to a team and they're like, I don't get the Bo Nix thing. I just don't see it. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, well, what is it? Auburn. And I'm like, well, if you're going to bury Bo Nix for Auburn, then you have to bury Jay Daniels for Arizona State. And then you have to talk about some of the mistakes that Caleb made at his first stop. Like, all these guys have, Penix, you can talk about him at Indiana and he got hurt. And so you're going to hold that against him. It just feels like Bo Nix is held to some Auburn moments more so than any of these other quarterbacks. And I think there's also part of that of like, look, the SEC is the closest to the NFL that we have. And I saw him in that environment and it was too big and too fast. And he wasn't any good. And I'm like, well, guys are allowed to get better. Guys are allowed to improve. Guys are allowed to, play in a little bit more friendly environment in terms of who he's playing with in regards to who he's playing against. So I think that's all kind of thrown together. He's a little bit older. But I think people hold the Auburn thing against him more than anything else.
How do you rank the receivers? Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, and then should there be that 15 pick gap between those guys and Thomas, Mitchell, McConkey, et cetera?
Yeah, to me, those are 3 like of my top 4 players. So I literally have it Caleb, and then my number 2 player is Marvin Harrison Jr. My number 3 player is Rome Odunze. My number 4 player is Malik Neighbors. I don't ever remember having 3 wideouts that high.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say
equally graded.
There's the 14 class. There's the 96 class. Is this the most hyped, top heavy class?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of that, it's hard to say because to me, since I did it, like was when you had Julio and AJ Green in that same draft, it was like, okay, those guys are 2 freaks that were way up there. So this, in terms of, I think this is a function of 3 really, really good players that, I had a higher grade on Jamar Chase that year that he was coming out than these guys, but I think they're just 3 really, really good dudes. And I think after that you have depth, but I do think there's a drop. I think I have Thomas at as my 15th or 17th player. So that's the little gulf there between Neighbors and him. But then it just goes on. I mean, there's just a lot of depth of guys like 17 to 60. Like you can make a case for a lot of dudes, like 13 or 14 of them, total, in the top 60 picks, you could make a case off of the grades. But I stacked it the way I did because I think everybody kind of has their own formula for how they look at these guys. Mine, when I have the same grade, basically, darn near the same grade on the top 3 guys, I always think of red zone and third down. Like when everybody in the stadium knows you need a first down, it's 3rd and 6. Can a guy win? And then when you get inside the red zone, when we need it's a 4-point play. Be able to get that done. I took the bigger guys. I just like with Harrison and Adunze what they give you there.
Speaking of physical guys, I like the kid from SC,
Xavier Leggett.
Yeah, I like him.
Yeah.
And I planted my flag on the Brian Edwards thing a couple of years ago, and I'm still waiting for that thing to pop. Should I put some stock in this kid? To me, you watch him run around, and you look at his frame, and you hear him talk, and you're like, this guy, he's a stud, but he hasn't reflected as highly on draft boards.
So he ended up, and I just put out my final one today. I think I had him. He got into the top 50, so he's like 48 for me.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a chance. I mean, I think he's going to go before then. I think there's a chance he could sneak into the back of the first. I think he's more than likely going to go early in the second round. He's a tough evaluation for me because he is muscled up and he is fast and he can get on top and do all those things. But the 2 things that I struggle with, number one, he's a little bit tight. So I didn't think there was, he's going to be able to run the full route tree. And then the other thing is at the Senior Bowl, we had all these guys down there and McConkey was killing dudes and Pearsall was killing dudes. And Leggett just kind of blended in. He didn't really jump out there. So that to me was something that I struggled with. I think you have to have a very specific plan for him. You can flip him a jet sweep. You can throw him bubbles. You can throw him on slants. You can throw him on goes. But I think if you come out there and you want him running comebacks and curls and running, I don't think you're gonna. It's not who he is at this point in time.
Is he a worse route runner than AJ Brown?
AJ Brown was different. AJ Brown played almost exclusively in the slot. They're built exactly the same. They're both rocked up muscle dudes. AJ had unbelievable awareness and instincts. When you look at a slot guy, guys who can work in zones and just have a feel for it. I thought he was a little more instinctive and a little more natural. But I think body type wise, they're body doubles.
Hey, when Malik Washington gets taken in the 3rd or 4th round, will you say something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense? You can workshop it, but my friends in Charlottesville say this guy has the green light. Now, that doesn't make any less sense than put your foot in the ground or run downhill.
Yeah, he's right.
But my friends in Charlottesville say this guy has the green
Detroit
light.
Marriott is going to get that note in the trash in about 6 hours. But the kid can play. He can play.
He's good.
I'm excited about him. The
question. What's more likely? Green light makes it into my analysis, or this apple gets eaten? What's
no,
that's 50.
I'm going to say green light into the analysis because that's a green apple. That's disgusting.
That's all they had, dude. It's not my choice. It's all they had.
Disgusting. The last wide receiver question for me was Neighbors had some comments, I think, towards the Giants that were indicated that maybe he would rather not play there. Am I getting this right? Or
I haven't seen those.
Okay. But say that a player in today's day and age says, I don't want to play for that team. If Caleb Williams was looking at the Carolina Panthers, I think most of the general public would be on his side and saying, I don't want to work for David Tepper.
Yeah.
Elway, Eli Manning, it's happened before. I feel like today that's going to happen more often. How are organizations going to treat that when it does happen? Is it like a strike against somebody's character? Or are they able to look back at guys like Elway and Eli Manning and say, hey, sometimes these guys are just being smart businessmen?
Yeah, I think I feel like I hear it every year. I remember, the Burrow year. That was a big conversation because Cincinnati had been kind of a dumpster fire. It's he's going to force his way out of there. It just hasn't really happened. And it's to the point now where I'm like, yeah, Eli Manning, what has that been, 20, over 20 years since we've seen it. And I know this is the empowering era, and athletes with the transfer portal and everything else, NIL have more power than they've ever had. It would take somebody of that type of stature of status. And that's why, I think a lot of attention will be on Shedeur just to see what happens with him next year because Deion, and I guess he's kind of walked some of that stuff back, but that will be one where it's okay, he's kind of got this status, to maybe make that move. It's just going to be hard for, the next regular guy to go in there, because I know these general managers, and they'll call the representative and be like, hey, just so you know, he's the top player on our board and he's going to save all of our jobs, and you can bitch and moan and say whatever you want. But at the end of the day, you have zero power and zero say in this situation. If we want to, if you're willing to sit out, you've made enough NIL money and you don't want to play football anymore, then that's yours, but we are taking you. Like, that's how those guys think.
Yeah. Well, I want to finish talking about position players with some linemen, man. Is this Byron Murphy's silence? I mean, I feel like we haven't heard anything about him relative to his skill set. I think he's amazing, man. Like, I really like this kid. Yeah. And I wonder if the lack of noise is a product of a bunch of people hoping that maybe he's going to be there for them. And how high do you think that he might go?
I think he could go in the top 10.
I agree.
He's one of those ones where it's funny when you're talking to teams and they're like, the teams that are picking up at the top, and you go over we'll go over like scenarios of like, okay, trade back and you trade back into the early 11 through 15, and it's like, oh yeah, well, here's the list of players. Byron Murphy's in that list. Then I talk to the teams picking to the back, like, if we traded up, it'd be like, look, keep an eye on these 3 or 4 guys. Byron Murphy's in the list of the trade up guys. I'm like, well, if he's in the trade back group and he's in the trade up group, maybe he's in the I've got the 8th pick in the draft and I'm, or the 9th pick in the draft, and I'm just going to take him. And look at the off season of what these dudes are making. There's not, for edge rushers, Chris, I'd love to get your take on it, but like, I think if we sat down and compiled a list of like, use the word just like impact edge rushers.
Yeah.
I don't know what that gets us to, 20 to 25 maybe. You do a DTs, there's like 10 of them, and they're all special and they're all making huge money now too. So when you can get one of those guys, it's never been more valuable than it is now.
Yeah, I always think of it like there's one tier of like superpower having edge rushers, like the TJ Watt tier. And then there's like the Hutchinson, Josh Allen, like Trey Hendrickson tier, which is like those guys are elite.
Mm-hmm.
They're never going to be maybe TJ Watt. And then I think it goes as deep as 25 edge guys in the league, to your point, where it's like, hey, the rest of those guys, you're going to be fine paying them top dollar. Even if they don't get 10 sacks a year, they're going to be disruptive. They're going to be helpful. And so, I look at it that way. And to your point with the defensive tackles, there are only a few game changers. And then the tiers below game changer are a lot smaller.
100%.
So I think that's a really interesting assessment. And I look at this guy as a guy who can walk in and help right away. I think about the Rams. I wonder what the Rams are going to do. I mean, like when I looked at their team last year, the reason that they were able to be so competitive defensively was obviously the D coordinator did a great job. He was rewarded, but it was Aaron Donald.
Yeah.
And, he's gone now. And so I wonder, are they going to go back end or are they going to go up front? Could it be Murphy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
could they make a move and go up and
I don't think he's there. I mean, they're 19. He ain't going to be there when they pick at 19, so they're going to
have to move up. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to go get him.
But I do think
out.
With them, they might look up front.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think, to me, and I like Newton's a good player. And then you kind of go beyond that. Fisk is a solid player for Florida State, but like to me, it's clearly Murphy, and there's a huge gap. Yeah. So that to me is why I think if we're looking up and he ends up being the first defensive player picked, that wouldn't surprise me.
Let's talk edge.
Yeah.
What do you like?
Dallas 1.
You would take Dallas 1.
Yeah, he's younger.
I wouldn't take Dallas 1. I could just be dead wrong on this thing. I've heard the Brian Burns comps. I get worried about high hip guys, like really high hip guys. And that, he strikes me as that guy. He's a sideline to sideline player for sure.
Are you going to say Jared Verse or Latu?
See, if Latu had no injuries, he might be my guy. He might be. I think his toolbox is as full as anybody's that I've seen coming in the draft the last couple of years. I mean, he's just a guy who's going to. He reminded me of T.J. Watt, And then Verse, I love Verse. I mean, the ceiling with Verse. I guess the way to ask then would be, who's got the biggest delta between ceiling and floor, and then who's got the smallest one out of that edge group?
Well, I mean, I would say the smallest one. Let's start there. I know what Verse is. Like Verse is a very distinct style. Like he is rugged and rough, and he's just going to be a car crash. Like that's what he's going to do. He's going to. I mean, like to me, you look at some guys like Judon was kind of like that coming out. Like he's just going to test your brakes every single rush. And that's what the Verse. To be honest with you, Verse has a lot of similarities to Will Anderson. He's not as polished as Will Anderson was, but same build, same style. So I hopefully, and hopefully, to me, like a lot for him is going to be determined on where he goes and how they like. If you just let him play in that jet front and kick him out and give him a runway, like he's going to be good, man. He's going to go right through dudes. But he's to me. I feel like he comes in clear packaging. Like I know exactly what I'm getting with Verse. And then with Latu, I'm with you. He's the most skilled. He's easily the most skilled rusher. He reminded me a little bit of Hendrickson because I remember when Hendrickson was coming out, I'm like, this guy just knows how to rush. Like he can feel you overset. He kind of just feels it. It's like it's like a little bit of kind of a just an instinct thing where he just got unbelievable instincts and hands.
He's an option rusher.
Yeah.
Option rushers don't come to, I mean, they have plan, but the plan changes. And there's some guys who are elite athletes and they're saying, well, I'm going to burn this edge, see what he's got.
Yeah.
Maybe there's one thing that comes off of that, or I'm setting up my big spin move late in the game. But this kid, I can tell, comes into every rush and he's like, I can win this rush. You know, when it comes to rushing, there's 5 doors that appear open when the ball is snapped. Any number of them close in a millisecond. You got to know which door to run through. And I mean,
it's a great way to put
that
it.
To me, that's the way I would put it. And when I look at Latu, like any number of those 5 doors could open. One could open, shut again in the same snap, and he's going to be able to make that determination in his head. It's just the health.
Yeah, that's why I didn't know. Like, I put him at like 16 on my list. So I ended up Turner. To me, you guys mentioned Josh Allen earlier. Some people to me just he has a lot in his body. He's a freakish length. He can long arm guys. He's not like an explosive power, but he can just kind of get that steady push just because he's got a lot of juice. And then he can bend when he gets up top. And so I just think he's conducive to be a good rusher. And I also think I give him a little bit of a bump. Like the guys who as true freshmen get on the field at Alabama and are making plays, like that's not easy waters to navigate. You got to pass. You know how many 5-star kids you got to pass up as a freshman to get on the field and be an impactful guy there at Alabama? Like that means something to me. He's not nearly as rough and rugged as Will Anderson. Like they're polar opposites in terms of that stuff. So that's why if you told me that Latu'd never been injured a day in his life, he would be my number 1 guy.
Me too.
But I didn't want to. I don't know. Like I'm not a doctor. I just know I hear neck fusion or whatever. I'm like, frick. Like that's not ideal.
Not good. Yeah, not at that age. My dad has that. He's like 60. He can't turn his head. Like, it's like that's not a good thing. All right, could you order the offensive tackles? I saw a tweet that you had that said, "Hey, some of these O tackles I just can't get behind."
Yeah.
How's it sitting for you this week as we come into the draft?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a deep group. But there's, I always had to remind me, there's no such thing as a perfect prospect. Like there's stuff that all these guys have to work on. I kind of come back to the sin that's difficult to overcome of offensive linemen. The lesson I've learned over the years is like, if you don't have core strength, whatever else you got that's great and looks pretty and feet and bend doesn't matter. Like you have to have core strength. So that's like a kind of a factor in how I throw these guys together. But Joe Alt to me, I thought was like the fairway pick. He's young. He's freaking enormous. He's not an elite bender, but guys never get it. Guys don't get into his chest because he's just so freaking big and long. And he always stays squared. He kind of always stays attached. So it's not like, I'm very quick to remind people, like, this is not like Laramie Tunsil. Like those guys are freaks. Like this is not that. But this is just a really good player who's going to start and be a solid player for a decade plus. I don't think there's as much risk there, but I don't think you're going to be, sitting there on the elite player. But then him, for me, Fuaga, I just love the way his temperament and the way he played. Like he's just, he's so explosive and nasty in what he does. And he can anchor. So and some people think he'll play guard. I think he can hold up and play right tackle, but he's there. Fatanu from Washington as like a legit 5-position flex. He's that weird body type of guys that are like 6'3", but he's got freaking enormously long arms. And of all these guys, like if you want to just say like who can roll their hips and like really snap on people. Like he's got that to him.
Well, what's the point of being 6'7" if you got 6'7" arms? You'd rather be
Yeah.
6'3". I always say that about like, who cares how tall a D tackle is? I want to see how long his arms are, because that's.
And
your
I think it's
functional
better.
height.
I think it's better when you have the combination. I've talked to some of our mutual friends about this, but like interior D lineman, leverage and length is a perfect combination.
Perfect. Aaron Donald.
Give me 6'1", 6'2" with freaking long arms and big time explosiveness.
And it can throw us off as rushers when a guy's 6'3" and he's got long arms and he sets like a guard and he's got like some of those guard characteristics. So I think the Washington guy is intriguing.
And is that why some people will pass on Fuaga arm length?
That was it was funny with him. I remember having that first conversation about that because I watched him. The first time I watched him, I think this guy was the best guy and the best tackle in the whole draft. And this was during the fall, and I called Buddy, and he was like, I don't know his arm length. I'm like, he's got short arms. Like normally when you're watching a guy who's got like you'll have something in there about guys getting into his chest or he plays short arm. I'm like, that's funny because like I watched him. I didn't have anything in there that I thought that was an issue or a concern.
That's interesting. Guys can overcome it with angles for sure. All right, I got a couple quick hitters for DJ. We'll let him go. Polarizing prospects this year. Give me one or two. The most polarizing, could go high or low.
Yeah, polarizing player. Well, I mean, we talked about some tackles earlier. Like I couldn't get myself to warm up to the BYU tackle or the Houston tackle. So they're both athletic. They look great on the card because they've got unbelievable dimensions. But I didn't think either one of them kind of played with that core strength that I was talking about. So those are guys where I kind of have pretty buried on my list with the full knowledge and expectation they'll go much, much higher than that. But just wasn't they weren't my flavor.
All right. So we got the big guys done. Really nothing else to cover. Daniel, appreciate the time, man.
Well, I had one question.
Okay.
Talk about question marks on people. Daniel, why 2 queen beds, not a king room for you in
That's
Detroit?
A good question.
That's a great question. So my son is a sophomore at Baylor, and he works in their recruiting department. So they have in the past had someone come from the network and actually do my social media stuff, like just posts and everything. And then look, we're cutting back a little bit. There's been some tough decisions that have been made, so not going to be able to get that person out here. And I personally don't like. I just want to enjoy. I like getting into the draft and enjoying it. So I just told my son, like, I'll get you a flight. You're coming down here, and then you can do that. So if there's anything on Twitter that isn't that you think that's a really dumb tweet, hey, not me. That's not me, dude. That's not me.
It's indentured servitude. We're just getting in the in the mood for.
The best part about that is I got a daughter who's a senior in high school. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Like he doesn't know anything about social media. Like I'm your person for this.
Well, she's going to get her shot soon.
Yeah.
Dan, appreciate the time, man, and have a great time this week. And hopefully you can get some rest after the final pick is in.
You can still do both.
Yeah, it's still out. It is a bad apple. Golly,
that was costly. All right, brother. It was great to see you.
See you guys.